Welcome back to Living with a Classic. Down here in storage with my daily driver, 1975 XJ6, or well, at least I tried to daily drive it. It's been sitting here for a couple of weeks with a bad wheel bearing. I noticed it first when I was coming back from a car show, and when I came up here, had the windows down, it was hot, and when I was making left turns, it was definitely making a squeaking sound up front. I then completely forgot about it for 2 days and then drove my daughter to daycare. And immediately on the way there, I remembered, oh yeah, this thing makes a funny noise. Let's see if it still does it. On the way home, it started doing it again on left turns, and the last bit back to my house, it was doing it, all the time. So parked it down here. It's been sitting ever since. Picked up a new wheel bearing, so I got that. Hopefully nothing's been damaged, stub back, so all that, we'll have to look at that. But let's connect up the battery, see if this thing fires up, drive up in the workshop, and then hopefully just replace a wheel bearing. I always disconnect the battery of the car if it has to sit for a little bit, just because, well, don't want it to get drained, but this thing doesn't have a drain, but just a safety thing as well. So let's go over here. I have one of these quick connects though, so it's pretty pain-free. And I'm going to be pretty confident this thing starts, so close that again. Grab the keys, and oh, it's good to be back in this thing again. I do miss it when I don't drive it, so I'm really hoping this will be a quick fix and I can get out and use it again, even though it's going to be quite hot to use this car at the moment with no AC. Second attempt from sitting is not that bad. Brake warning is the sensor in the top of the reservoir is completely worn out. So sometimes it goes on, sometimes it doesn't. I'm thinking about just disconnecting it and then ordering a new one. But yeah, we'll drive it up into the workshop and have a look at that wheel bearing. Got the car up in the air, but before I remove the wheel, I just want to feel if there's any play. I did feel that when I looked over the brakes, and I couldn't feel anything then. So that's just me moving it back and forth. Yeah, what you can hear is just the wheel turning a little bit. But yeah, absolutely no play. It does turn freely. It's a little stiff. The other side's not, so it could be now that the bearing is worn that's just stiff, because I don't remember turning like this and the brakes don't seem to be dragging. One thing I did when I came back, I quickly popped off a hubcap on both sides, and I felt this hub was a lot hotter than the other side, but both brake calipers were equally cool. So definitely a wheel bearing issue. But I'm gonna pop this off, set up some lights, and then I'll show you what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward removing all this. We've done that before. And then once we get it to the bench, that's when the interesting stuff starts. But luckily, you don't really need any special tools to replace the front wheel bearings on these cars. The wheel is off, and I've turned everything to this side, and I'll let you know why in a little bit. There are many different ways to get this off. So what I want to get to is the hub here. So here's a disc. This is the hub. They're connected right here. And get the hub off, and then I'll get the bearings off with that. So I need to remove the dust cap, of course, as well, and there is a split pin there and a retaining nut. But there are a couple of ways of doing it. So when I did this on the XJS, remember when we just cleaned the bearings and greased them because they look fine, I removed the brake caliper and all of that because we're replacing the disc. I just messed with the brakes on this car, so I don't feel like doing that, but there's a party trick. I believe on the Series 2, they brought this out. I don't know if Series 1s have them, but there's a hole back here. And in there, you can get to the bolts holding the hub on. So I've just removed one of them, as you can see. And yeah, I used sort of an air hammer. So I'm going to do that with the other ones. And that is just an easier way. You don't need to touch the brakes. Because on this car, there is a mounting bracket over here for the hard line and the hose connection, And for that to come off, you need to remove that bolt, and that's really tight with the shock and everything. And this just makes it a little bit easier. But I'm just going to remove those bolts now, get that off. Then I'll come back, we'll remove this dust cover, get that nut off, and this whole hub should just slide off. It's a bit of a tight squeeze, but it works. There we go. I think that should be the last one. And of course, that's the one I almost dropped. It's always a lot more difficult doing something like this when you film. Alright, it's down there. I'm going to get a little magnet to pick that up, but got them all out now. Get a magnet to get that one out, and then we'll go on to here. Well, I got the washer out, but the bolt is still there, but I should be able to get to that pretty easily with the hub out, so that was a little bit of a blunder. There is a grease fitting on this wheel bearing, and I have greased it several times. The last time I did that was a couple of weeks ago, or probably a month ago now, when I replaced brake hoses. So I don't think that is why it's failed, but in my ownership I have not had this bearing out, because this car, I mean, did have a blown head gasket when I bought it, but otherwise it was pretty much on the road. It won't spin now because of that bolt. So I sort of just greased everything up and went for it. But otherwise, most cars I buy have been sitting for 15 or 20 years. Then I removed the bearings, completely cleaned them up, and filled them up with grease, and they've been fine so far. There's grease in here. It does look rather dark. Let me see. It does look rather dark. But yeah, gonna clean that out. Grab a pair of pliers here. Straighten the split pin. Really what I'm looking for when I get all this off is you wipe everything down, and what I really need to look at is the stub axle, because if that is bad, then well, there's no need in putting a new wheel bearing on. So they can become bad from, of course, pitting, water ingression, but also if one of the races spin, which I hope it has not. So that is why, if you have a noisy wheel bearing like I have, do what I did: park the car and order a wheel bearing. Don't drive around with it. So hopefully, yes, I did drive home from a car show and I noticed it when I pull off the highway, so hopefully I didn't hurt it too bad. It was definitely not noisy enough so that I could, why won't this come out? So I didn't hear it, with the windows up on the highway, but on the small roads outside my house with the windows fully down, I could hear it. I'm trying to get, there we go. Just being lazy, not going and get the correct tool. And the funny noise you're hearing in the background is my dog snoring. Believe it or not, she does snore quite a bit. So some people like to leave the castle nut on a little bit just to help get the bearing off. So we may do that. Hopefully these will separate and they're not completely fused together, because I don't feel like taking the brakes apart. Maybe some gentle taps. All right, it's moving at least now. There we go. That's also a good thing to keep the nut off, because otherwise the whole thing would have just flown into my face. Here we go. doesn't look particularly burnt or anything, but we'll take it all to the bench and have a look at it. Here is the seal and the inner bearing. So far nothing looks terrible. The race and everything looks pretty okay. But let me get a rag and completely try and clean off this stub axle, and we'll go in with a bright light and just see if we see any scoring or any weird stuff on there. After wiping down everything, that stub axle looks really good. Can't see anywhere where anything has been spinning or anything like that. No pitting. I mean, this little darker spot here, nothing I can feel with a finger or anything. So that's really good news. That's all in good shape. Now let's head over to the bench and we'll remove the old bearings and put in new ones. I removed most of the grease that was in here, and as you see, it doesn't look too bad. So I could see all the new grease that I pumped around, you know, from the grease fitting, and then everything that was around the bearings was quite dark. So yeah, I've learned my lesson. Even if you buy a car that is on the road, maybe just take this apart and clean it out. So I'm gonna get this seal out of here, and it's been years since I've actually taken this rear bearing out. There we go. Put that to the side. I have a new one, and that is the inner bearing. We'll put that down on a piece of paper, and we'll try to have a look at them later, see if we can see maybe why it was noisy. But other than that, got some more just old grease in here. I'm gonna wipe out the inside of here, then we'll have a look at the races, see if we can see anything on there. But I don't think that we actually can see any failure. I just think that we had a very early sort of noisy bearing, and then I was probably just lucky and caught it early before, you know, anything major happens. You know, it doesn't take a lot of dirt in here to really mess things up. Yeah, this all looks really good. I'm starting to question if this was the side, but I did write it down, and also I could feel that massive heat difference in the bearing. It was quite hot. The basically the dust cap on this side, and like I said, both brake calipers were equally cool. We're coming to another part that will be a little bit difficult to film, but as you can see, this is the outside and that's the inner. So I just have a punch resting against the race there, and that's all I want to do. I just want to knock it out of there. So it's open down the bottom, it's going to fall out, and I'm just going to hit that one out, then I'll flip it over and hit the outer one out in a similar manner. But you guys are not going to be able to see that extremely clearly. Hopefully you can see where I'm aiming at. Yeah, let's give this a shot. And I can't see it that well either. Okay, it's starting to move. There we go. That is one inner race. And we'll save this because we're going to use this to knock in the new one, so you don't have to hit on that one. But this stuff is really, really strong. So even the knocking I did there with a punch doesn't really leave a mark on it. Now we got the other one, which should theoretically be easier. I cleaned out all the old grease and I've knocked in the inner race. And I'll show you guys how I did it by doing the other one, but let me see. Here is the new bearing. There's no grease or anything on it yet, but see, that sits there, and then we have the dust seal out there. So we're still gonna have to grease this thing up. And the great thing is that you use the old races to knock in a new one. So I set this one down here and just knocked around it, got that one in. Now we'll flip it over and we'll knock in the race for the outer bearing. Let's see if I can flip this over to show you guys what it looks like. So it's going to get knocked in there. So I'm going to set everything up, put you guys on a tripod, and then we'll knock in that one. Hopefully it goes in as easily as the other one. You need to make sure that it's perfectly clean where the race is going to sit. There's no debris or anything in there, because you want it to slide in nice and smoothly. So that is very nice and clean now. I'm going to open up this new bearing here. The weird thing is, we'll have a look at that later, I can't see anything really wrong with the old one. So yeah, but at least I know that I have new bearings. So here it is. It goes in that way. I like to use oil to lubricate it to make sure it slides in. So this is just regular engine oil, 20W50 mineral oil. And let me see. This is the new one. There we go. Can use the old race on top of it. And there's my hammer. And we'll just start tapping around. Getting it started is sort of the critical thing, and then okay, see, we got it a little bit crooked this time, but let's see if we can tap it here to get in. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to knock it out again. Yeah, it's starting to straighten out. There we go. And I'm not knocking hard at all, because you can't crack the housing, you can crack the ring. Well, I mean, if it goes in crooked, you'll probably crack the housing. So just be careful, and you don't need to force it. It should, it shouldn't fall in, but it should definitely slide in. You can just check how much is left. I'd say another 5 millimeters, something like that. Yep. It just takes a little while, but we're getting there. Okay. We're pretty much there. We're just going to knock it a little bit more, make sure it's seated. You should hear a difference in sound. Hear how it sounds a little bit more solid now? It's because we're in place. And that's it. All in place. Now we're ready to grease up the bearings, which is a messy job, but a very simple job. I've greased the inner bearing and put it in there, but don't worry, I'm going to show you guys how you grease bearings in case you've never done it before with the other one. But I just want to show you guys the amount of grease we're talking about. It's quite a lot. And you're going to want to just buy a large container. When you get a wheel bearing kit, you'll get one of these little pouches of grease. That is not enough. So don't even use it. Just get like a big bucket of grease and grease your bearings, because you don't want to have to redo this. After the bearing is in, the other one, we can put on this, it's a dust shield slash keep the grease in shield. So we're gonna get something to knock that into place. That might work. Or maybe just loosely like this. There we go. And always just checking that the bearing can still move and all is nice. So we're going to flip it over now, and I'm going to show you guys how to grease the bearing. But before we do that, I'm going to take some of the grease here and just fill up just the whole cavity in here. I am going to load it with a grease gun as well, but I think it's a good idea just to fill everything up with as much as I can, just so we have a lot of grease in there. Greasing a bearing is not difficult, it is just messy. Get gloves. Get, maybe not that much for a big bearing, maybe this much for a small bearing. I just like to put it there in my hand, and you want to push it through the bearing so you see it come out the other side. So I'll show you there. You see there? It's starting to come out the other side. So you want to work it all the way around the whole bearing. Then one thing I like to do, once I've worked it around once, I like to spin the bearing a little bit, wipe off any excess, and then just make sure that, just do it once more and make sure that that grease comes up. And of course you don't need to have gloves, but it's a lot nicer. So you see, it's coming out nicely there. Spin it over, try again. And yeah, you're gonna need more grease than you think. So any other parts store you can buy grease. I have tried many different types of grease. I haven't really found a major difference. Grease is better than no grease, so as long as it's made for wheel bearings, I won't see any issue with it. Alright, this is starting to look really good. And now I'm going to try and spin it once, even though I'm completely covered in grease. There we go. And then I'm just going to make sure that the grease comes out nicely. So as you see, there's a lot of grease that goes into one of these. So that little pack of grease that this stuff came with, no way near enough. It's as if they just want you to, they just want the bearing to fail again. There we have it in place, and there's a lot of grease, but don't worry about that. The one that's in the middle, that will be pushed out by the stub axle, and you can wipe that off. I have filled the whole inside of here with grease. I've also checked that the grease fitting works. So once it's all in place, I will pump in grease here as well with the grease gun. But now we're ready to put this on the car. It's very important you always use a new split pin. These are one-time use in my opinion. Get a new one. So We'll put this on the car, but before that, I'm just going to get some grease and just put a light coating on top of the stub axle and then slide this into place. I have a light coating of grease on there, and here is the hub. The only thing I've done is just wipe off any grease here, just so that doesn't get flung out onto the brakes. And now we just want to slide this on. Be careful here because this bearing is going to want to fall out. And we're getting pretty close into place here. Just going to remove, like I said, the excess grease is going to get pushed out there from the middle. And if you're doing this with all the brakes off, it's a little bit less fiddly, but it is definitely doable to do it like this as well. There we go, that should be lined up. I'm going to get the bolts back in, and then we can torque this down and then set the right tension on the wheel bearing. Got this all back together. These are tightened, the bolts that holds the hub to the disc together, and everything spins nicely. So the only thing I've done is I have already seated the bearing, and there are many different ways of doing this. What I like to do is I like to tighten this nut down, not super tight, but a little bit, and then spin it so that everything spins freely, and then I just sort of torque it down a little bit so it doesn't really turn that easily, just to make sure that the bearing is sitting where it should. And now I'm going to loosen it off, and it's time for the adjustment process. So you see it's way too loose now. You can even hear the play. So while spinning it, tighten it until you start feeling some drag. And take your time. So this is loose. That's a bit of drag. That is a bit of drag there. It's still not too much. So you can once again go back, just feel that is completely loose. But let's see, it sort of wants to stop there. And I know that the split pin fits right up there in that castellated nut, so I don't want to go back too far, but if I go right there, I'll fit a split pin. If I go there, I'll fit, but it'll be way too loose. So sometimes you need to compromise a little bit, and I think we'll just over tighten it. We can still turn it, and I think right there will be pretty good. Just need to get in the exact right position to get the split pin in. Everything is set now the way I want it, and I'm just gonna put a bit of grease in here and see that it sort of comes out where I want it to. Okay, can you see that now? When I'm spinning it, I can see the grease just working its way out. So that fitting is definitely working, and you can just wipe away a bit of the excess here. So that's really good. And that is a good thing of regular maintenance to do. Just put some grease in that fitting. I do it, I don't know how often, but a couple times a year. I like to grease over every grease fitting of the car. It just doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't really cost any money, and it's good for it. Okay, I'll clean out the dust cap, but you could really actually call it grease cap. I make sure that the little hole there, the ventilation hole, is free. That is also so that if you put grease in here and it comes out, it should shoot out there, but Shouldn't need that much. As you see, as soon as you spin it, the grease wants to move out. So I cleaned it up and I filled it about halfway full of grease. And now we're going to tap that into place. One thing you can do is use a screwdriver on the edges just to make sure it seals. You really don't want any dirt getting into your nice new bearing. All right, there we go. One new, very nice wheel bearing. Wheels are back on, it's down on the ground. One thing I did was on the other side, I just took out the outer bearing, just inspected it, and it looked really, really good. And remember, there was no play, no sound on this side, but I cleaned it out and I put fresh grease in there and I cleaned out the whole area between the outer and inner bearing, pushed in some grease from that grease nipple, put this all back on and adjusted it, and it feels really good on this side. On both sides, I felt with the wheel and there's absolutely no play in the bearings, so the adjustment seems to be really good. But I'm going to check it again, like I said, after a couple of longer drives. But I'm going to leave the hubcaps off for now, and I think tomorrow, maybe the day after, I'm going to go for a little bit of a test drive and then just feel the hubs, make sure that they don't get warm, that there's no sound, and I'll bring you guys along. So let us go to the future. It's a couple days later and I've just ran some errands. First time taking this car out since fixing the wheel bearings, and let me see, yeah, somewhere about 40 kilometers of that I've driven, just around to various shops and things, and it's been perfect. No squeaking noises from up front, no warning for anything. I've gone out and I felt the hubs several times, still have the hubcaps off. They're nice and cool, so everything is working as it should. I will, like I said, on the new bearing, I will check that adjustment in, depending on how much I drive, but maybe a couple of weeks or a month or something like that, I will check that. But otherwise, things feel really good. The only other thing I can a little bit complain about is I do sometimes have just a slight judder when braking. It feels like it's up front, so that might be a slight warpage in one of the discs, because we felt that all the pistons move really well, brake hoses are new, all of that. But I can live with that, and at some point I might either get new discs or take these off and have them turned, because they do seem to be nice and thick. But Daily Driver is back on the road and I can use it again. It's a little hot without AC, and I have been thinking maybe that's something I need to add at some point. I think that I've rather fallen for this car and I enjoy driving it now, especially with the new engine. It's really nice. Maybe when I just finish off the interior, maybe that just final touch might be to add AC. That would be very nice. But anyways, if you like this video, please give a thumbs up, share it with friends. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot, and you can follow along, this car with my daily driving adventures. Something's bound to go wrong, or any of the other cars here on the channel. So until next time, I'm Adam. This was Living with a Classic. I'll see you soon.